So there's no way that you can use just satellite data or just models or just ground data or just information from farmers, for example. None of those individual pieces is actually going to give you the complete picture of what's happening on land. What you actually need to do is use all of them in a coherent way. And so through that understanding, we started building a tool called Flint, the Full Lands Integration Tool. And then suddenly the corporate sector, 5 or 6 years ago, suddenly really clicked on to realizing that nature was an extremely core piece of climate change. How do we actually start assessing that?
Welcome to Nature Is, where we brainstorm, share innovative ideas, and have conversations to stir our spirits and elevate our actions for a better world.
Hello and welcome to Nature Is. Today we have the pleasure of hosting Rob Waterworth, who is the co-founder and Chief Science and Innovation Officer from FLINTpro, joining us this afternoon, evening for us, and morning for you in Canberra, Australia.
Yeah, thank you very much. Absolute pleasure to be here, and really looking forward to the discussion.
Oh, well, thank you, Rob. And let's just start from the beginning. Can you tell us about what FLINTpro does? Tell us a little bit about your company.
Sure. Look, I mean, it's a fascinating story from start to where we've got to now, and I wouldn't obviously want to bore everyone with hours of discussion, but it's been really interesting. We started out, the co-founders and myself, over 20 years ago now, working in carbon accounting, originally designing and building systems for countries, in particular Australia. And how do you build these systems to start doing some form of land analysis that's not just creating some form of report, but actually creates information that is actionable? It means you can actually, just go, well, yes, that's a problem. What do we do about it? So we did that for many, many years inside government. We started the company actually 10 years ago. And originally, it's a really interesting journey that tracks the journey of climate change in many ways as well over the last 10 years. Initially working a lot with the Clinton Foundation and others, trying to help other developing countries plan systems for how they track deforestation. Through that, one of our main lessons that we've always had is you can't do this type of work with just one technology. So there's no way that you can use just satellite data or just models or just ground data or just information from farmers, for example. None of those individual pieces is actually going to give you the complete picture of what's happening on land. What you actually need to do is use all of them in a coherent way. And that's really where our skill set fits. And so through that understanding, we started building a tool called Flint, the Full Lands Integration Tool. We were using that a lot with countries. And then suddenly the corporate sector, 5 or 6 years ago, suddenly really clicked on to realizing that nature was an extremely core piece of climate change. How do we actually use nature to help solve climate change, all the other things we need from nature? It's not just about climate, it's about production of food and fiber. It's about biodiversity. It's about all of these things that nature provides us. How do we actually start assessing that? And so we took all of that experience and we created FLINTpro, which was the world's first system to say, let's take all of that and turn it into an online software as a service system, and then also start providing data to people as and when they need it.
Well, it's so helpful, and I really relate to your point about sort of the evolution of the climate movement. And putting my former chief sustainability hat on, I've been so looking forward to this conversation because I remember when we were doing the greenhouse gas emissions inventories in some pretty parochial ways, and now when I see what FLINTpro has done, building on top of that with biodiversity data, I find it to be such a forward-thinking innovation and so helpful for not only peers like me, but as you said, for many different stakeholders. So can you tell us a little bit more about what FLINTpro provides and how that really looks to the end user? What kind of data are they ascertaining through the platform?
Yes, certainly. We've got 3 key products that we produce. There's, starting from the very top end, the advanced analytics type platforms. And that's really for companies that are really at that point of taking huge amounts of action across the land that they control. And how do they actually get that really fine scale information that they can look at and make decisions on? The next step down is an insights product, which allows for detailed analysis, almost as a bit of a self-serve type system. Groups can come in, put their data into the system, and using default models and default information around the world, get a really good picture of what's been happening on their land. Around greenhouse gas emissions and removals, so in particular around forests. Remember, forests are a fascinating beast. What makes the land sector so interesting is that it's not just the emissions, it's the removals piece, and all of the lag impacts. Things that happened 20 years ago are still impacting emissions and removals today. So really fascinating piece in that. But then the main product that we've just released is Reg IQ. And that's probably a really exciting piece for most groups, because what that's doing is it's taking all of this experience, using all of the FLINTpro data and engines to produce really useful information. So things like emissions per ton of production. So not just is there some emissions on this land, but compared to how many tons of wheat or grain or beef or soy did you produce, how many tons of CO2 did you produce? That allows you to start thinking about those production cycles and efficiencies and where are you looking for in the landscape to actually reduce those. And the product also then helps with things like EUDR, the European Union Deforestation Regulation, which is a hot topic at the moment across the world. It's a really interesting topic. It's fascinating to see that come online in the last 6 months. And really helping people understand, well, where is my risk profile in here and where do I need to worry about compliance? And if I do need to worry about compliance, well, FLINTpro can then offer a solution that takes you all the way to that. So it really gives you that ability to analyze your entire portfolio very quickly and then make the decisions about where you need to take action.
Yeah, and I mean, you've identified, I think, one of the biggest complexities that many companies are facing, which is, moving from thinking about carbon and greenhouse gas emissions to their impact on nature and biodiversity. And that supply chain piece that you've just described, I sense, is actually one of the biggest pain points, because there's an understanding of an operational footprint. If you construct a building, then you're displacing nature, and replacing that is a little bit more logical than understanding the broader supply chain impacts. And so I think what you've described is, enormously helpful for businesses that are trying to make that connection to their broader supply chains.
Exactly. And I think that it's a really fascinating piece, because the land sector is inherently far more complicated. Impacts in one place impact other places. What you're doing 20 years ago, as you said before, has an impact today, and both positive and negative. You can plant a tree today. That's a very positive thing, but the impact will be felt for hundreds of years from doing that potentially. So it's really trying to understand and tease apart all of those challenges across the supply chains, and really helping those companies understand, well, if you're sourcing from these areas, what does that mean for you? Is this an area where there's actually a high risk that you're going to be causing significant damage to nature? Or is it actually well managed? And how do you start working with that? And the second piece, I think, which is really interesting, is also thinking about the social aspects. That there are a lot of social aspects to all of this too. And how do you therefore support your suppliers rather than just try to cut them off? And so this is a really fascinating piece of having this higher fidelity data that allows those much more sensible decision processes, while also keeping the production that you need to make your products. You can't just decide, well, we're not going to use soy anymore, if your soy is a core part of the products you're developing. So
yeah, and you mentioned regulation, so I could definitely see that use case for the TNFD and SBTN, the Science Based Targets Initiative, and other regulatory frameworks. And you just alluded to companies thinking about their impact on nature. Is there another third use where they're really using this as a lens to understand risk through climate resilience or climate risks in their supply chains? Do you see that as another way that companies are thinking about FLINTpro?
yes, definitely. And we've already conducted those types of analyses for several groups around, and the multiple types of risks that you might see. There's obviously the climate risk on how that may impact production in the long term. You have the short-term risks or the immediate risks that pop up. What's the risk of fire in a lot of these areas, for example, in Australia or in Africa and other places where fire is very prevalent? What's the risk of that with changing climate change? If you're going to start planting trees or you're going to take action on these things, what's the risk that that action may be reversed? So there's a huge level of risk that comes through these things. And it's less about saying it's too risky, we won't do it. Most of these things have mitigation activities available. So what's our risk mitigation? What's our risk? How do we mitigate it? And I think that's the next piece that many groups, as you pointed out, are really starting to think about. A lot of that risk for the built environment has been well done over the past. And I think obviously all of the issues with the computer chips and the Thailand flooding and all of those things from years ago really drove that forward very quickly. Nature is probably a fair way behind. But what we are seeing definitely in groups like the financial sector is realizing if you're going to put out a 20-year loan on a farm, what if the rainfall on that farm is going to drop by 30%? Will it be productive? Will they be able to actually repay that loan? Or are you actually just loading them up with debt that will end up being bag debt? And that, I think, is a really interesting piece that we're seeing from a lot of forward-thinking financial institutions now as well.
Yeah, climate-related financial risks. I think this is not as exploited and as one might think by investors and financial institutions, but I agree. I see these kind of three areas of risk mitigation, the opportunity to improve one's footprint from a business perspective and think about nature, and then, as you said, the regulatory compliance piece. So tell us where you imagine FLINTpro being 5 years from now.
Oh, certainly. Look, we've always had a very clear vision at FLINTpro, which is that we want to be the system that people trust and rely on when they need information about their land. So if you're an organization that has impact on land, and that could be from banks to farmers all the way through, if you use FLINTpro, you can trust the information that's coming out of that system. And we feel that that's absolutely vital as a mission, because without that type of data, no one's ever going to trust and take action in the land sector. So how do you build that actionable data set that allows people to go, rather than going, oh, what model did you use? And suddenly everyone starts arguing about models and input data and who's got a slightly better machine learning algorithm or some process like that. More about how do you say, look, we trust all of that. All of that's now trusted. All we need to know is know that you've inputted your data correctly, pretty much the same as a tax return or anything else we do. And the results at the back end are what you need. Thank you very much. And no one needs to worry about this core engine because FLINTpro has solved that problem. And then that also allows you to meet all of your regulatory and other requirements as they come through. And we're a very long way down the track on that, obviously. And now it's really just a matter of building that out more and more over the coming years.
Yeah, this is the sort of the ideal, right? The one-stop shop where a company can understand their environmental footprint, how to improve it, how to comply with regulations, and have that remit very clear to them. So an excellent vision. And along those lines, how is FLINTpro different from some of its competitors?
Yeah, look, that's a really great question, because it has become a very, as you and I'm sure many of your listeners understand, it's become a very confused and busy market over the last few years. That's actually quite a good thing in many ways, because that's a function of the fact that what we're seeing is, one, interest in the sector, but two, this huge opening up of data sets by governments and researchers for the good of nature. And what that's meant is that all of these satellite data sets and other data sets are now available for processing, which means you can really get some really fascinating information out of them. But we are actually very different, and we're different for three key reasons. The first one is, I think, just pure experience. We've worked in the area for over 25 years. The vast majority of the staff some of us have worked in it for over 30 years now. And not just in a technical front. We've worked in it from a policy front, from a market front. So we really understand all of the angles that companies need. So we're coming at it from that very much, what's the need, and then build the technical solution to meet that need. That's actually very unique in the market. The vast majority of other groups have come out of universities or other sectors, and they're really targeting a really specific little thing, like, can we map some deforestation with satellites? It's extremely important, very useful. We partner with a lot of those groups because that data is very important to us, but it's not a complete solution. It's an input to a solution. Which leads to the second reason that we're different, which is FLINTpro is an integration engine. It's not a pure remote sensing platform. So what we do is we bring in those remote sensing products. So we can bring in the best available data for a site and use it to produce you the best possible results. That leaves all of that space open. So all of that competitive space in the remote sensing is fantastic for us, because what it means is more and more people are producing better and better products that we can then use to create better and better emissions and biodiversity and other estimates out of the back end of the system. And I think the third differentiating point is our range of products. We're not just trying to produce some maps. We're actually producing a range of products that help companies right from the start of understanding their risk, understanding their profile, all the way through to how do we start taking action. And those three things make FLINTpro really unique in the market. There's no one else doing those three things at the moment, and that's why we live and breathe it every single day.
That's really helpful, Rob. And I think that second point about the data integration piece is really important, because like one of the I think one of the challenges that a lot of businesses are facing is, okay, we've finally gotten our heads around greenhouse gas emissions and, the COP protocols, and now we need to think about biodiversity, but it's such a localized issue that it's difficult for businesses to understand what that means. So if we were to just double click on that for a moment, this is probably where you're pulling in a lot of other pieces of nature technology that we will have covered in previous episodes, from eDNA. You mentioned, remote robotics and geospatial imagery. Maybe you can speak a little bit to just this localized piece, which I think is quite troublesome for a lot of companies to wrap their heads around.
Oh, definitely. And biodiversity is very complicated for those reasons of it's the impacts of, as we said before, the impacts of one area impact a different area very easily. And unlike carbon, in particular trees and crops and soil, a lot of this biodiversity moves around, which is, it moves around through time and it's hard to track. So that carbon is challenging to start with, and then we're taking it to another level when we're going to biodiversity. A really fascinating thing to watch happening, basically. But remembering that a lot of these discussions aren't particularly new. There's slide decks that I remember presentations from 20 years ago saying we'll have a carbon market in 2 years and the biodiversity market will be 2 years after that. That would have been lovely if we'd have it in place all now. Now is better than later, but so the concepts and the issues are relatively well known. From a FLINTpro perspective, we are really starting out on that piece of how do you do the Task Force on Nature-related Disclosure reporting. So how do you get those dependencies and those impacts understood, and then how do you start moving forward? So there's this, as you've pointed out, huge range of data, everything from IBAT style tools all the way through to very advanced modeling, and then all the way through to ground data. What we're doing with several clients is trying to provide those linkages. So we have the high level analyses that allow us to consistently classify carbon and biodiversity risk at the same time using the same consistent data. We are also using a series of simpler models to look at that, of what the impact of change can be on those. But then when it comes to the site level data, again, that's much more of a partnership. That's where if a site, you really need to understand what's going on, then the groups looking at acoustics and eDNA and things like that, we form partnerships with those groups to allow that full seamless top-down and bottom-up approach coming together.
That's great. Well, I realize that it's a slightly technical question, but I think a lot of companies are trying to understand that. So thank you for indulging.
No, look, it's a fascinating question, and it's going to continue to be for a number of years. The exciting part is that everyone's actually looking at it and taking action now, which 10 years ago it wasn't happening. So.
Well, clearly you were one of many people that have been working on this for decades, and only in recent years is this seeing the light. So thank you for all of that work over the years without a lot of visibility or probably gratitude. But it's nice that biodiversity and nature are finally having their moment.
It is lovely to see. To be honest, there have been times in their career, you're sometimes flying over countries where you see oil palm expansion just destroying the landscape and wondering what you're doing, working in it when you can't seem to have an impact. But I think this is the piece is that, a lot of people who've worked in this for a very long time are excited and really driven to see this push forward now. And that is absolutely fantastic.
Well, Rob, always our last question, which you're beginning to touch on already with those observations, sort of grounded in nature. Where are you most at home in the natural world? You live in a beautiful place.
Oh, that's a great question. Look, I mean, I just love all of it, to be honest. I started off in a career in the 90s for a very clear reason, which was, and I love all of it, not just from nature, but from the production in nature. I just find it fascinating how the entire world actually relies on nature and people don't realize it. Every time you eat a meal, when you build a house, when you do anything, nature is involved in what you're doing. It's just fascinating. But I think probably the south coast of New South Wales, a few hours from where I live, it's a remarkable place of the world. I generally don't tell people about it because I'm too afraid that all the tourists will turn up. Quite happy that it's generally quite empty. But it ranges from everything from these absolutely stunning beaches through to these huge eucalypt forests. And you can all do that within an hour's drive. Absolutely stunning part of the world. So I will promote it. If you get the chance and you're coming to Australia, get down that way.
Oh, well, that's a great recommendation. And I think your point that we tend to forget all of these connections to the natural world, let alone companies who are accustomed to just using nature as part of their product lines. This is such an important tool to ground us back into that connection and even better what we can do about it. So thank you, and to the team at FLINTpro for this amazing work. And we look forward to really, following this incredible journey. Actually, one last question, Rob.
Yeah, of course.
What's needed to help FLINTpro scale right now?
Oh, look, I think it's scaling already just purely because of the markets and the sudden need for this data and information. And that's the most exciting piece. It's really just understanding that there is a solution out there for you right now. So if you're feeling confused, and that is completely understandable at the moment with the number of startups coming in particular satellite-based startups, if you're confused in that, then trying to pick a solution is difficult. But when you come to FLINTpro, you don't just get a solution, you actually get the team behind it. And that's where we really want to be, to help these companies and help to scale, not just FLINTpro, but to scale the solutions. So we can really help you with that. Are you worried about even which remote sensing company to use? We work with at least 7 to 8 remote sensing companies. We've reviewed hundreds. And so we've really done a lot of that scoping of the market already ourselves. And there's some great companies out there working in this space. So how do you really build those formations up? And I think, to me, that's the last piece of how do you scale FLINTpro. A lot of it is collaboration. No one has an end-to-end complete solution, because even us, we need the remote sensing products. And you don't want to lock to a remote sensing product. You want to use the best product available for your system. So you want to be able to partner with that group to then provide the data to give you what you need to get to your information and knowledge. And that's a really exciting piece of the puzzle.
Well, I love the collaborative approach. It creates a seat at the table for so many people that are working on this really important problem and solving this really important problem. Thank you so much for the great work you do in the world. It's really needed.
No problems at all. And thank you very much for the time. This has been a fantastic chat.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob.